Hello and welcome back to Russ's Movie Corner. My name is Russ, and as you can see, I'm sitting in front of my movie corner. I have my Through Faith t-shirt on, my King of Kings movie right next to me, and judging by the frame around me, we are back taking down Inspiring Philosophy's top 10 biblical problems for young earth creationism. Now in the last part, we had talked about this quote from Joshua John Van E. It came from a paper, as an actual dissertation paper for a doctorate in philosophy, called Death and the Garden, and this is on page 200. Now, what's interesting here is that just like the Bible, Inspiring Philosophy is taking some of what Joshua John Van E. said in this dissertation. Okay, now this dissertation was on vegetarianism and, the ancient Mesopotamians. Were they vegetarians? Were they not vegetarians? And he completely ignores the part in chapter 8 where after they come off the ark, God says, now you can have animals, okay, to eat for food. Because he kind of completely ignores the fact that in context, we're told in the Bible, right? We're told in verse 28 that humans are to have dominion over and rule over the animal, kind of subdue and rule over the earth, right? And it seems to me like both Inspiring Philosophy and by extension Joshua John Van E. here is kind of like taking that out of context and then trying to read their own interpretations into it based on what they think and what maybe some other people think, rather than trying to look at the text and just let the text read out for itself. Because they'd like to think that there's some kind of controversy here. So I will post a link. If you want to go read this paper, I actually found this fairly easily. I just searched him, and there was 3 or 4 links where you can find this dissertation, okay? And like I said, he wrote it back in 2013, so it's about 11 years old now. It's readily available. The one that I found was on the Internet Archive, and I'll say this. You can go to page 200. It actually starts on, I think it's page 193, and you can actually kind of read through some of his conclusions, because it's almost like he kind of contradicts himself a little bit here and there. Because he'll start in one direction, and then he'll pivot and then go in a different direction, and then pivot and go back in his original direction, and then pivot and go back in another direction. I don't know if he was trying to argue from both sides. I don't know if he was trying to maybe, try to state some of the other arguments that were being made. I have no clue really what this guy was kind of talking about at times, because, as I'm reading through it, I'm going, man, it's like I agree with this part, but then it's he comes out with this part which doesn't make any sense based on what he said originally, and now he's coming back to another part where he's talking about this, and then he's pivoting and then saying, well, but over here they're using these words for this, and then but over here they're using these words for that. It's really strange. It's kind of all over the place. But let me read, because here's what happened, okay? So, about the middle of page 200, okay? So if you remember that that Inspiring Philosophy put on the screen last video, okay, where he had 2 verbs, okay, to subdue and to rule, okay? And he got that from Joshua John Van E.'s dissertation here, okay? And so let me read. It says, the verbs subdue and rule are drawn from the realm of human interaction. They focus on gaining and exerting over another, a call to conquest and dominion. In them, humans are granted position to use animals for their purposes. These verses do not elaborate on which uses are legitimate or illegitimate, but the verbs by themselves do not imply a prohibition against eating meat. On the contrary, it is more natural to understand them as implying the opposite, the permission to eat meat. if you completely ignore the fact that in verse 29, he tells specifically man and woman, I give you every green herb. He doesn't say, oh, by the way, here's all the animals, have at it. He doesn't say that. He says, here's herbs, here's, stuff, here's this stuff, okay? Now, let's keep going on. On the contrary, it's more natural to understand them as implying the opposite to permission to eat meat. In verse 28, humans are told to subdue the earth based on its other occurrences. Subdue denotes an active pursuit of dominion through the use of force over someone who is offering some degree of resistance. In other words, I'm not sure if that one's rule or submit. No, subdue. Okay. So subdue involves a conflict in which the stronger gains control over the weaker. It is used most frequently of international conflicts, but is also used of forcing people to be slaves and of rape. We'll get to that in a second. Even though the action denoted involves opposition in the use of force, the term does not itself have a negative connotation. Force is appropriate when wielded by the right people. Then he goes on to say, but how does this notion of gaining dominion relate to an inanimate object like the earth? Genesis 1:28 is the only place where subdue appears with another, I think it was earth, as its direct object. However, there are 4 uses of the nephal of subdue with earth as a subject. These descriptions, and that's in Numbers 32:22 and 29, Joshua 18:1, and 1 Chronicles 22:18. Zechariah 9:15 is similar, since the sling stones are best taken as a metonymy for the enemy. These descriptions of the earth being subdued are helpful in determining what it means to subdue the earth. All of them are in the context of Israelite wars against other nations in the land of Canaan. One solution offered is that subdue has a somewhat unique meaning in all these verses. It is not about subduing but taking possession. A few commenters argue, largely on the use of Akkadian kabasu, that subdue can refer to stepping upon something which is symbolic of taking possession of it. The subdue with earth in Numbers 32:22 corresponds to another one with Deuteronomy 3:20, where basically it says, until he has driven out his enemies before him and the land is subdued or possessed before Yahweh. And then in Deuteronomy 3:20 it says, until Yahweh gives rest to your brothers, as to you they also possess the land that Yahweh your God is giving them across the Jordan. And basically what he's saying there is that the uses of the phraseology in the original Hebrew are very similar there. Okay? Now, remember that we're looking at the Aramaic Hebrew translations, not the original Hebrew, because those were destroyed. We have in our possession the Dead Sea Scrolls, which does give us a little bit more context, because those were done around the same time as the Septuagint. In fact, it was likely that during that time, as the Septuagint was being created, the Dead Sea Scrolls were created and then put in those caves in Qumran. Because it was happening during the 400-year interval. Genesis 1:28 would thus be translated and take possession of it, step upon it. And then he says there are a few problems with a possession interpretation. First, the cognate languages do not support it. It is true that Akkadian kabasu can mean to step on something, but there is no contextual evidence that it was ever used in the derived meaning of to possess. Second, the idea of possession does not fit well with the biblical nephal occurrences. If the kai is to be read as to step on, to possess, then the nephal would be something like to be stepped upon, to be possessed. The problem is the preposition, and then he lists the preposition, which occurs in these contexts. What does it mean for the land to be stepped on before someone, to be possessed before someone? Third, there seems to be a contrast between subdue and then the other preposition in Joshua 18:1 and 3. The narrator in verse 1 steps that the land was subdued, and then Joshua in verse 3 calls on the people to possess the land. In this passage, at least, subduing would seem to be prior to possessing in Israel's conquest of Canaan. Another more common solution is to take subdue as applying metaphorically to the direct object, earth. Humankind subdues the earth by making use of it. This often this interpretation is motivated by the assumed peaceful state of creation. Subdue implies opposition and conflict, thus it must have a metaphorical meaning in Genesis 1:28. Within this group, it is debated in what ways humans may use the earth. Some see humankind's power as basically unlimited, others understand it in a more limited way. Barr states, I doubt whether more is intended here than the basic needs of settlement and agriculture. Basically, what is intended is tilling. It corresponds with the working or tilling of the ground in the story, Genesis 5:15. The problem with metaphorical interpretation is that it fails to adequately deal with the Nephal emphasis of subdue and earth. They are all in context with Israel's wars against the nation in the land of Canaan and refer to the state of the land after those nations have been defeated. For example, in Numbers 32, 21, and 22, Moses tells the Jordanian tribes that in order to inherit the land on the east side of the Jordan, they must cross the Jordan armed for war and fight until Yahweh has brought victory. And he says, until he has driven out his enemies before him and the land is subdued before Yahweh. In the same tie between defeated enemies and subdued land is also clearly seen in David's words to the leaders of Israel in 1 Chronicles 22:18. He has given the inhabitants of the land into my hand, and the land is subdued before Yahweh and his people. But again, as I stated in the last part, subduing can mean two different things. Because subduing doesn't necessarily have to be because you could say, I subdued the perpetrator, right? If I'm a cop or if I'm a person and I grab somebody and I, put them in a full Nelson, let's say, right? So I have them in a full Nelson, right? I'm subduing them, okay? But couldn't I say the same thing about tilling the land? Wouldn't that be subduing the land? Right? Because before, what's the land made of? Well, it could be grasses. It could be, if I want to plant wheat, for example, wouldn't I have to go out and till the land and, take up all the old stuff and plow the land to get all of the soil churned up and to get all the nutrients into the soil? Isn't that subduing the land? If people are eating a mostly vegetarian diet, wouldn't that be, pretty fair to assume? And maybe that's what he meant by subdue animals. Maybe get some oxen, teach them how to plow. Have you thought of that? That's subduing oxen. You put a yoke on them and you teach them how to walk, and then you have like a little plow and you plow. I mean, the problem here is that Joshua, and like I said, I will put a link to this website, okay, down in the description box, okay, and I invite you to go and read this section for yourself, because like I said, he jumps all over the place, because he'll jump over here. Well, they said this. Oh, they said that. Now, let's talk about the different interpretations of this word, subdue, okay? Because I only found it translated, okay, as grape in one translation that I own, okay? And that translation is in this Jerusalem Bible, okay? Now, the Jerusalem Bible, okay, is a Bible that was done, and it has the historical books, and it also, you can see, I don't know if you can actually see, but it has a bunch of the apocryphal books, okay? Because I have another one called the Reader's Bible, I think it's called. The Catholic Church, okay, well, I should preface this. The Hebrews have a bunch of books that were written during the 400 years between Malachi and Matthew. I talked about this in my Christy Burke video that I just recently filmed. Basically, what ends up happening is that when you see, apocryphal books, okay, being used, okay, you'll sometimes hear them referred to as apocryphal. It's because they were done during a time where there were no prophets, so they're not considered canonical scripture. Not even by the Jews are they considered canonical scripture. They're still read. They're still, somewhat used in synagogues. They still talk about them a little bit. They're mentioned in places like the Talmud and some of their other historical writing books that they've written on the scriptures. And when the Orthodox and Catholic churches were kind of deciding if they wanted to keep these books or not, Constantine said, no, we shouldn't use them because they're not official scripture. And the Pope in Rome said, yes, we are going to use them. Screw you guys. So the Catholic Church does use those books. Most Christianity does not. Okay? And that's not to say that you can't read them and get good things out of them. It's just they're not official scripture. Okay? So, Nehemiah 5:5. So this is what he was talking about when he was talking about in the context of slavery and grape. Okay? Because basically what ends up happening is, okay, in Nehemiah 5, so basically in Nehemiah, okay, it says, the ordinary people and their wives began complaining loudly against their brother Jews. Some said, we are having to barter our sons and daughters to get enough corn to eat and keep us alive. Others said, we are having to mortgage our fields, our vineyards, our houses to get corn during the famine. Still others said, we have had to borrow money on our fields and our vineyards to pay the king's tax. And though we are the same flesh as our brothers, and our children are as good as theirs, we are having to sell our sons and our daughters into slavery. Some of our daughters have even been raped. We can do nothing about it since our fields and our vineyards are now the property of others. So basically what's happening is that at this time, because of the 70 years, okay, because of what the Babylonians did for 70 years, the people that were living in the land, okay, some of the Jews were coming back into the land. And now there was a famine in the land, okay, because they didn't have enough crops to feed everybody. And so these people, to get enough food to live and to pay taxes and do all this stuff, they were having to sell their sons and daughters into slavery, okay? And these other Jews were taking advantage of that. But again, this is the only place in all the translations I have, and I will go through each one, okay? In all the translations I have that mention that word, okay? Now, the only other place in this context that it is done, okay, in Esther 7, okay, this is when Haman has been found out, right? Haman was the guy that tried to go up to Queen Xerxes and was like, hey, man, like, there's all these Jews that won't bow down to you, and they're like really evil people. We need to kill them all. And right before he could set out the proclamation, or right as he set out the proclamation, I believe it was Mordecai. Yeah, Mordecai tells Esther, you're favored of the king, of Xerxes. Go tell him what's going on here. Like, this ain't cool, okay? So she goes and she tells the king, and the king's like, are you sure about this? Where's the proof? So she tells Mordecai, I need to get more proof. So Mordecai goes out, finds out about Haman's treachery, okay? Then Queen Esther, basically, okay, gives Xerxes this proclamation. She's like, here you go. This is what's going on. Now, it says, while they were still talking, the king's eunuchs arrived in a hurry to escort Haman to the banquet that Esther had prepared. When the king and Haman were seated at the banquet with Queen Esther this second day, King said to Esther as they drank their wine, tell me, what do you request, Queen Esther? I grant it to you. Tell me what you desire, even if it is half my kingdom, it is yours for the asking. If I have found favor in your eyes, O king, Queen Esther replied, and it please your majesty to grant me my life, That is what I request, and the lives of my people, that is what I desire. For we are doomed, I, my people, to destruction, slaughter, and annihilation. If we had merely been condemned to become slaves and servant girls, I would have said nothing. But as things are, it will be beyond the means of the persecutor to make good the loss that the king is about to sustain. King Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, interrupted Queen Esther. Who is this man? He exclaimed. Where is he, this schemer of such an outrage? Esther replied. The persecutor, the enemy? Why, this wretch Haman. Haman quaked with terror in the presence of the king and queen. In a rage, the king rose and left the banquet to go into the palace garden. It's because Haman, okay, didn't outright tell the king, okay? He just basically, like, whispered sweet nothings in his ear, like, hey, man, these Jews, man, they're pretty bad. We got to get rid of them somehow. And he made the king sign a proclamation without the king knowing full well what the proclamation was about. And so, like I said, when Esther goes to the king and tells him, the king's like, I don't know if I can believe that. Bring me some evidence. And so that's when she comes back. And that's really what, like, if you've ever seen the movie One Night with the King, okay, it was a movie about Esther and Xerxes, and it was basically about how she goes in to spend one night with the king, okay, because she was made queen, because she was so beautiful. She was made queen by Xerxes, the Persian king, yes, the same Xerxes that went and made war in Thermopylae and got his buns beat on the plains of Marathon about a year later, okay. he like, you know, ran back with his tail between his legs. Okay, he was the one that Queen Esther, okay, slept with to save her people, okay? And so this is the fallout from that, okay? Now, so the king, so in a rage, the king rose and left the banquet to go into the palace garden, while Haman, realizing that the king was determined on his ruin, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Here's the verse in question, okay, Esther 7:8. It says, when the king returned from the palace garden into the banqueting hall, he found Haman huddled across the couch where Esther was reclining. What? The king exclaimed. Is he going to grape the queen before my eyes in my own palace? The words were scarcely out of his mouth, then a veil was thrown over Haman's face. Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, was present. He said, how convenient. There is a 50-cubit gallows which Haman ran up for Mordecai, whose report saved the king's life. It is already at his house. Hang him on it, said the king. So Haman was hanged in the gallows which he had erected for Mordecai, and the king's wrath subsided. So those are the only two instances of the word grape, and I only use that just so, you know, I think I said it earlier, but basically, those are the only two instances of that word. Now, the usual translation I use, okay, the English Standard Version here, in Nehemiah 5:5, it says, now our flesh is as the flesh of our brothers, our children as their children, yet we are forcing our sons and daughters to be slaves, and some of our daughters have already been enslaved. But it is not in our power to help it, for other men have our fields and our vineyards. Now, 7:8 of Esther, and the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they were drinking wine, as Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. And the king said, will he even assault the queen in my presence in my own house? Okay. So, you can kind of understand there. Okay? Yes, they're using the pejorative of enslaved, because that's basically, because they were saying, yes, some of our daughters have been enslaved. You know, they were saying we've had to sell our sons and daughters, and some of our daughters have already been enslaved, implying that some of their daughters, like some of the people to pay for the food that they were getting, were like forcefully taking the daughters away. But again, I could say the same thing about animals, right? If I go to a breeder and I get a dog, right? Would that be any different than going to the pound to get a dog? Not really, okay? You might understand the pedigree a little bit more. You might understand some of the other things a little bit more. But the end result is the same, okay? Now, that's not to say that, like, one over the other. Now, one of the things that I really wanted to kind of talk about here with this, and I know I've been talking now for about 24 minutes, but I wanted to make sure that you guys understood that just because the same word is used in two different places to mean two different things, okay? Because I'm going to read from the New American Standard, which is a more literal word for word, okay? It doesn't necessarily mean, because that's, I mean, I talked about this before when I said the word space, right? When I say the word space, what do you think of? Well, your mind probably goes where my mind goes, which is space, right? The final frontier, the outer blackness that we see every night, right? Where the stars reside. But I could also mean space, right? I have space around me, okay? I could say there's an empty space over there. Does that mean that that's a vacuum? That there's no atmosphere in it? No. It just means that there's nothing in it. Right? So, the point being that just because we use the same words doesn't necessarily mean that we mean the same thing. Okay? I mean, it's the same thing with assault. Right? I could say those military guys are going to assault that fort. I could also say that that football team is going to assault the end zone. Does it mean the same thing? No. Now, we don't necessarily use assault the end zone all the time, but that's kind of the same type of thing. One, the guys are using force to go take something. On the other side, the guys are taking a ball and trying to get it over a goal line. Okay? And some might say, well, they're violent about it. Not necessarily. I mean, sure, there's some bodies slamming against each other. Sure, some people are being tackled. But, I mean, you know, what happens if, you know, it's like yes, the front line is blocking, and that might be considered to be somewhat violent, but, you know, I mean, what happens if the quarterback hikes the ball, and he throws the ball down the field, and the wide receiver's wide open, he catches the ball, and then runs straight into the end zone? Is that violent? No. It's pretty darn peaceful, if you ask me. Okay? If he runs out of bounds, the guy can't hit him. I mean, sometimes they do, you know, because maybe the guy was running too fast, and by the time the other guy started to slow down, the guy caught up to him and smacked into him and stuff like that. But again, it's not necessarily always violent, okay? That's my point. Violence, it doesn't have to mean violence all the time. And just because something is being used in a violent context doesn't mean that it's always a violent outcome. Just because it's being used in a certain way. Now, let me read the New American Standard, okay? In Nehemiah 5:5, it says, "Now our flesh is like the flesh of our brothers, and our children like their children. Yet behold, we are forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves. And some of our daughters are forced into bondage already, and we are helpless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others." And then Esther, 7:8. "Now when the king returned from the palace garden into the place where they were drinking wine, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, will he even assault the queen with me in the house? As the word went out the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face." So there's that. Now, let me read one more, and then we'll get back into the video. Okay? This is the NIV. Okay? Nehemiah 5:5. Although we are of the same flesh and blood as our countrymen, and though our sons are as good as theirs, yet we have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but we are powerless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others. And then 7:8. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" It's pretty clear, okay, that he's not necessarily saying that Haman is actually in the process of doing anything to the queen. Okay? It's a question, because Haman is trying to plead, so he's literally like, so if you can imagine like a divan, right? Okay? And Esther's sprawled out on it, okay? And Haman is like doing this kind of thing, okay? He's like groveling before her, like, help, help. As the king comes back in and he sees him pawing at his own wife, okay? I mean, imagine, if you will, you walk in and you see a guy, maybe it's a friend of yours, something like that, and he's like pawing at your wife or girlfriend. Would you think something was going on? Probably. Okay? And his immediate thought, because it says that the king got up and stormed out in a huff. Okay? And so Esther is lying on this couch, and Haman's like, oh no, I'm gonna die. And then he like throws himself at Queen Esther and begs for mercy. Okay? To beg for mercy. And Queen Esther's having none of it. She's like, get the hell off me, dude. But he's not quitting because he's trying to save his life. Okay? Now, I'm not justifying Haman's behavior here. I'm just saying the dude is pleading for his life, and Queen Esther's having none of it. She's like pushing him away. And so here walks Xerxes. He sees, okay, that Haman's going, no, no, please don't let me die. And Esther's like holding him, you know, like pushing his face back, right? Or pushing his chest back, okay? Like, get the hell off me, dude. And Xerxes is like, whoa, you're pawing at my wife, man. What are you going to do? You gonna do something in front of my own house? Remember the story of Joseph, okay? In Genesis, right? He gets sold into slavery in Egypt, and he goes to Potiphar, right? And Potiphar's wife is like, ooh, he's so handsome. I'm going to go get me some of him. And she's like throwing herself at him, and what does he do? He runs, and he leaves his jacket behind. He leaves his outer garment behind, okay? Because he's like, hell with you, woman, I'm not doing this. Potiphar's my master, you're his wife. I am not doing this. And what does she do? She cries rape. He tried to molest me. Sound familiar? Same situation. Okay? Same context. It's not that something's actually going on. It's the implication that there might be something going on. Okay? And that's all it is. It's not actually happening. Okay? Now, I brought up my strongest concordance last time. Okay? And I'll be moving on here in a second. I just wanted to mention this. Okay? So the word for this, okay, the cabal, which is the subdue, okay, means to subdue, overcome, enslave, be subdued, be subject, be brought under control, to subdue, subjugate. Now, the instance of molest is only mentioned once in the New International Version. Now you're probably thinking, okay, Well, that was the way that the NIV translators translated it. Well, what did the King James say? Because that was the original Strong's. Well, I'm glad you asked. I just so happen to have a King James Bible. Okay? And because we were talking about Esther, 7:8. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed whereupon Esther was. Then the king said, Will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Oh, I'm sorry, you were lying? Again, dude, this has nothing to do with actual grape. It has everything to do with the implication of what is going on. Okay? And even then, in Nehemiah 5:5, they don't actually say grape. Okay? Nehemiah 5:5. Yet our flesh is as the flesh of our brothers, our children as their children, and lo, we bring into bondage our sons and our daughters to be servants. And some of our daughters are brought into bondage already. Neither is it in our power to redeem them, for other men have our lands and vineyards. Oh, I'm sorry, what were you lying? The implication isn't rape. The implication is that they went off with the women. So no, to subdue something, okay, if you look at the actual connotation of the actual word, to subdue something doesn't necessarily mean, okay, what this guy thinks it means. It's kind of like the Princess Bride. You keep using that word. Don't think it means what you think it means. Because really it says subdue, overcome, enslave, be subdued, be subject, be brought under control. Well, can't land be brought under control? Because what happens if you leave the land? Weeds grow, things happen. Oh shit. I'm sorry, what were you lying again? So, I'm sorry if I can't take this Joshua John Van East seriously in this. Okay? If he's going to latch onto one translation of the word as grape in the English and then be like, oh, this is all about enslavement and grape. No. Because again, subdue can mean different things. Okay? Farmers subdue their land every year to plant crops. Farmers subdue animals. As I mentioned before, they subdue horses and they subdue cattle. They subdue dogs and they subdue sheep. Is that violent? Most likely not. If I want to break something, what does that mean? Doesn't always have to be violent. Because I can drop my phone and break the screen. It's an accident. It wasn't intentionally violent. I didn't throw it down and break it. It just happened to drop and break. It's the same thing with horses. You're not, when we use the term break in the horse, we don't mean you literally beat the living hell out of it and break all of its bones. We mean that you break its independent will to get it to understand that you don't mean it any harm and you just want to get on its back and ride it. Okay? And generally speaking, horses still have a very independent spirit, even after they break them. Okay? They just understand, oh, you want to get on my back now. Okay. Cool, let's go. I've been on horses. I was horse camp counselor for a Christian camp in 2001. Okay? I got on horses every day. And, yeah, a lot of them were very independent. Okay? I think one tried to eat my shirt a few times. His name was Buddy. That horse was crazy. Kept trying to eat my shirt. I was sitting there leaning on the fence, and I had on a chamois shirt, okay? It's like a, just a small button down, kind of light covering because it was kind of an overcast day. And so I'm sitting there at the fence going like this, and I feel this like tugging. And I look over and the horse is going, I'm like, hey, what are you doing? Later on, I was down there because sometimes when they did tests for horse camp, they had you would stand there with the kids because they would get nervous and stuff, and so I'd be telling them jokes, and I'd be kind of, the horses, their lower lips are kind of very flappy, right? So I would play around with their little jaws and stuff like that, and I would pet the horse, and I would talk with the kids while I was doing that, and I would joke with them just to keep them relaxed. And and I'm standing there and I'm holding on to the reins, and then I let go of the reins for a minute, and then all of a sudden I feel this like on my shirt, and I look over and Buddy, same horse, trying to eat my sleeve. I'm like, what is it with my shirts, man? You keep trying to eat my shirts, and the kid's giggling back there, and I'm like. And he did it again. Like, I let him go for a couple minutes. I walked around, I did some other things. I walked back over. I'm standing on the other side of him. And feel this again. I'm like, what are you doing? Okay? Horses, just because you break them doesn't mean you're physically, breaking their bones and doing all that kind of stuff, okay? The act doesn't have to be violent to get the point across. And that's the problem with this quote, okay? So let's jump back in. We're going to let it play for a few seconds. Because we're past this point. We ended at about 1440 something. So
the second word for ruling over the animals seems to suggest humans had the right to use animals for any purpose, like food and clothing, implying they already had the right to kill and eat animals. But this means the command from God implies the earth was not a perfect, blissful creation. Instead, this verse implies the earth was chaotic and needed order brought to it.
No, it doesn't.
Also, humans seem to be given the right to kill animals, implying death was already in existence.
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't, dude. Because that wasn't the pejorative of that passage, if you actually understand what it means. Again, I've already talked about this in the last part. Okay? And I spent most of this video, okay, explaining that just because we use certain words in certain context doesn't necessarily mean it's the same meaning behind the words. Okay? That's called eisegesis, not exegesis. Okay? Exegesis is letting the text read out. That's why I said there's space and then there's space. Which space am I talking about? Could I be talking about that space over there? Could I be talking about space surrounding the earth? Could I be talking about the space inside of a box? You don't know unless I say the context. Just saying space doesn't tell anybody what you're talking about. Does that make sense to everybody? I hope that makes sense. Okay? Because this guy, this Joshua John Van Ee, and by extension, because, basically inspiring philosophy, found this guy's dissertation and was like, oh, hey, guess what? He's backing up everything I'm saying, even though he's taking some of it out of context and throwing it in there to try to make it sound like he's backing him up, when in actuality, the guy's just kind of saying, look, some of these words are used in certain connotations and certain contexts, so to me it sounds like this is what they're doing, even though, as we've seen, it doesn't actually mean that. Because they weren't actually talking about that, except in maybe a couple of cases. And one case in Nehemiah 5:5. Okay? That might be the only place where grape might be implied, because it says some of the women have already been enslaved or, forced into slavery or something like that. Okay? One could assume maybe that's what they had to do. Who knows? Okay? But like I said, the only thing where it's translated grape is in the Jerusalem Bible. So where this guy is getting all of these instances, and you'll see that he only cites those two passages when he talks about enslavement and grape. Okay? And in one context, it was just one guy trying to avail himself of the queen, and the queen is going, "Get off me," and the king comes in and goes, "Dude, what are you doing?" Literally. He wasn't actually doing anything, but the implication was that he was, because he's pawing at the queen, trying to save his life. Like I said, not trying to excuse the behavior, but that's what he was doing. And in the king's eyes, he's going, "Ha ha ha ha," and he's going, "Hey, don't you even touch my wife, man, I'll beat you." And he's like, "You know what? Kill him." The end of Haman. So, was that an actual instance of that happening? No. That was an implication of it happening. So, like I said, I don't know where these guys are getting this from. Okay? Because it's obvious that they're trying to eisegete their own worldviews into this passage. Just like I've been saying since the beginning of this video 15 minutes before. Okay? And again, this is why I use the fair use notice. This is why it takes so long for me to do these videos. Is because sometimes, as I'm sitting here and I'm looking at things, I'll do a little bit of research on this kind of stuff. And I'll look at it and I'll go, my God, what were these people thinking? Literally, what were these people thinking? Because they're obviously not thinking much.
Number 2, bara. Number 2 is not so much a passage, but the use of a Hebrew word. Many young earth creationists believe this word refers to God creating out of nothing, and it is used frequently throughout Genesis 1. But looking at how the word is used outside of Genesis 1 implies bara doesn't necessarily mean creation out of nothing. It might not even refer to material creation at all. John Walton has done a full semantic analysis on the word, and he points out the word never necessarily means creation out of nothing.
Okay, again, that's like space. Space doesn't always necessarily mean where the stars are at. It can mean an empty void. It can mean, like, I could point at, I don't have a box, but I could say the top half of this marble container that I have some marbles in contains empty space. You can see that there's empty space in there. Okay? My water cup has empty space in it. So, of course, the word bara doesn't necessarily mean always created out of nothing. It has to do with physical context. Okay? Again, it has to do with context. Now, let's look at created. All right. Okay. $13.43. Bara. To create, creator, to be created, can refer to creating from nothing as well as to reforming existing materials, as in create in me a pure heart. Oh, I'm sorry. What were you lying? Right there! And I mean, I'm sorry to say, buddy boy, but yeah, Edward Goodrich and John Kohlenberger III. Okay. So, Edward W. Goodrich was professor of Greek and Bible at Multnomah School of the Bible. He is author of Do-It-Yourself Hebrew and Greek and the author of the NIV Complete Concordance. John R. Kohlenberger III is author or co-editor of more than 36 biblical reference books and study Bibles, including The Strong's Exhaustive Concordance of the Bible, NIV Interlinear Hebrew-English Old Testament, the NRSV Concordance Unabridged, Greek-English Concordance to the New Testament, Hebrew-English Concordance to the Old Testament, and the award-winning NIV Exhaustive Concordance and NIV Bible Commentary. He is taught at Multnomah Bible College and Western Seminary in Portland, Oregon. Oh, I'm sorry. What were you lying? Again, same word, two different meanings because you have to look at it in context. Are you that dumb? Yes, the answer is yes. Okay? Because honestly, you'd have to be an absolute moron not to understand this. Because just like the previous instance that I spent 40 fucking minutes talking about, it doesn't always mean the same damn thing. You have to look at the context of what the passage was written under. And it sounds to me like Joshua John Van E didn't actually look at the context. And I'll bet if you look, okay, at this particular fucking passage, okay, let me see something here. So I'm wondering if he's doing the same thing here that the one guy in my comment section, I did the comments on comments, where he was basically like, when the guy was looking at, like, let's say, one of the guys that he because the guy that was in my comment section basically said, I'll bet you believe that the New Testament was written, the Gospels was written by the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And I said, yeah. And he goes, I have like 5 PhDs that are backing me up. How many PhDs do you have? And I'm like, okay, so I did some research. Okay, and I found out that in one book, the guy basically said that they were like, basically what he did was the guy phrased it as, are we 100% certain that Luke wrote Luke Acts? Because he had it Luke-Acts. He goes, it wrote Luke Acts. And he goes, and he said, no, we're not 100% certain, but we are like 80 to 85% certain that it was Luke, because we have Paul talking about, Luke in certain contexts. We know that Luke was with him because we see where it starts in kind of a third person as they went there, they went here, and then halfway through, when Luke finally joins the party, With Paul, it shifts to we did this, we went here, we did that. And he said, so we're fairly certain that Luke had to have been there to be able to say, we did this. Okay? So I'm wondering if he's doing the same thing here, because this John W. Walton guy, okay, is basically, he's backing up that, yes, sometimes words have different meanings. And I'm pretty sure if you read this book, he probably says you have to look at the context, because it sounds like this guy's a pretty reputable scholar. Because in some of the brief reviews that I looked at there, because I was trying to find a PDF that I could download really quick, just to see if I could kind of look at where this is. And I'm pretty sure that what's happening here is Inspiring Philosophy was like flipping through this book, and he went, aha, aha. See, he points out the word never necessarily means creation out of nothing, and there are several times bara cannot mean creation out of nothing. Haha, see, got you there. Yeah, again, same word, different context. Okay? That's why I said, space and space. Which space am I talking about? Huh? Come on, which space am I talking about? Space and space. You're probably going to ask me, what's the context? Precisely. That's the same point here. Okay? It means creation, creator. Okay? But it can also mean, okay, it means create, creator, to be created, can refer to creating from nothing, as well as to reforming existing materials, as in, create in me a pure heart. Okay? So, here's what it is. Created, 21. Create, 10. Were created, 6. Creator, 3. Are created, 2. Creating, 2. Brings about, 1. Creates, 1. Done, 1. Not yet created, 1. Okay? Now, if they say, okay, because in 1344 it's bara in a second form, it means to fatten or fattening. Okay? But again, that has to deal with context. Okay? And then, because that is with 1374. Now, 1374, you're probably asking is, well, what's 1374? Well, 1374 is bari. Okay? Fat, choice, healthy. So, probably used in the context of bring a fattened calf. Oh, I'm sorry. What were you lying? Because again, that's just a pejorative of bari, which is a completely different word that happens to have the same form when it's used in a certain spot. It's kind of like saying fat and grease, or fat and lard. Okay? It'd be the same thing, just two different words. Okay? And then, bara in 3, okay, is to cut down, clear as in forest. It uses clear land, cut down, and make. Untranslated 1. But again, it all comes down to context. Okay? And then there's a fourth bara, which is not in the NIV, but it's the same as 1356. 1356 is bara, or barai. No, it's bara. Okay? It's to eat. Okay? So, yeah. But it's spelled a little differently. Okay? Which means to eat. So again, what it sounds like John W. Walton is doing here is he's saying, look, he's basically saying, look, there's different words out there, okay? And sometimes this word, bara, is not necessarily creation out of nothing. What we're talking about here is, when we say creation out of nothing, and I'm pretty sure he's probably going to start talking about the physics of it, but the problem comes in when you have someone like Inspiring Philosophy who's going to stand there and say, see, this guy's agreeing with me. Yeah, probably not. I bet if you went and read the book, you'd probably find that he's not actually saying, okay, that, you know, that the word doesn't always necessarily mean what we want it to say in certain contexts. Okay? But it's translated in various places as creating or creator, to create. That's what it's talking about. Okay? And that much is clear from the meaning of the Hebrew word. And there's only a couple of other translations where they're actually talking about different things. So let's let him finish here.
There are several times it cannot mean that. In Psalm 51, the author uses bara to ask God to make a new clean heart within him. This obviously doesn't refer to the creation of a new material heart out of nothing.
No, because the second part of that is what he's talking about. And renew a right spirit within me. He's talking about spirituality, dude. Something you wouldn't know about. I mean, honestly, dude. But again, I already mentioned that. Yeah, I already mentioned that. And guess what? It still means create, creator, to create something. And yes, it can be used to say, create in me a clean heart, O God. Because again, context matters. Oh, I'm sorry, was that supposed to be some big revelation? I've only said it like 400 times in this damn video.
In Isaiah 65, it refers to electing Jerusalem to be a place of joy.
Oh my God. Oh, these people are so stupid. Let's look at the context, because obviously this guy can't. Oh, you absolute flippin' moron! You know, I'm so fucking sick of these people. They are so stupid. Dude, context! Do you know what context is? Does anyone in this fucking universe know what context is? If you do, please post it in the comments below. Because obviously Inspiring Philosophy needs a damn encyclopedia and a dictionary to find out what the hell context is. I am so sick and tired of this BS, man. I really am. I really freaking am. Context, learn it! He's talking about the second coming here. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things shall not be remembered or come into mind. But be glad and rejoice forever in that which I create. For behold, I create Jerusalem to be a joy, and her people to be a gladness. I will rejoice in Jerusalem and be glad in my people. No more shall be heard in the sound of weeping and the cry of distress. Oh, where does that sound very familiar about? Where have I heard that before? Oh, I know! Oop. Oop. Revelation 21. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven for God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband, and heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man, and he will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. Oh, I'm sorry. What were you lying? Just because the same word is being used in two different contexts doesn't necessarily mean that they're completely different. Because God is going to create a new heaven and a new earth, and a new Jerusalem to replace the old Jerusalem, where he will dwell forever with his chosen people. You might want to get saved there, inspiring philosophy. Because then maybe you won't be trying to make stupid arguments like this. Are you flippin' kidding me right now? I cannot believe the level of stupidity on display here. That he cannot even, it just doesn't even enter his mind to look at the little passage heading and go, oh, he's talking about a new heaven and a new earth. I wonder if that means like the same thing as Revelation. Yes, it does. Because as I mentioned in some of my other videos, like Deconversion Zone, Christy Burke, you can't use prophecy to back up your argument. It's not going to end well for you, buddy boy. Because it's literally God saying, here's what's going to happen. Are you stupid? Yes. The answer is yes. Let's do a little bit more and then we'll call it an episode.
In Isaiah 43, it refers to creating the nation.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Are you flipping kidding me? Lord, save me from the absolute stupidity. Because, yeah, let's keep using prophecy books because that always works. Yeah. But now, thus says the Lord, he who created you, O Jacob, he who formed you, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed you, I have called you by name, you are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through rivers they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. I gave Egypt as your ransom, Cush and Seba in exchange for you. Because you are precious in my eyes, I honored, and I love you. I give men in return for you, peoples in exchange for your life. Fear not, for I am with you. I will bring your offspring from the east, and from the west I will gather you. Oh, I'm sorry, what were you lying? Because, yeah, he did. Not only, like, literally did he create them, Psalm 139, okay, you knit me together in my mother's womb. He's actually talking here about the fact that Jacob being another name for Israel, okay, he's saying, I created you as a nation. And I'm going to restore you. This is talking about the Babylonian exile. He's talking about bringing them back. Again, that's not any different. Because the Lord did actually create the nation of Israel from Jacob and his 12 sons. Again, did you not effing read the damn Bible, dude? Yeah. God created the state of Israel as we know it from the 12 tribes of Jacob, who was also known as Israel, which means what? Oh, that's right, struggle with God. Because Jacob literally wrestled with God. He struggled with God. And the only way that Jesus could get Jacob off of him was to touch his hip. popped his hip out of joint. And he said, let go of me. And he goes, not until you bless me. And he goes, fine, you will be blessed. And he had 12 sons. In case you'd ever bothered to frickin' read that, do I need to read it to you? Because you obviously don't know that. That same night he arose, Jacob, and took 2 of his wives and 2 of his female servants and his 11 children, and he crossed the ford at the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything else that he had, and Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, let me go, for the day is broken. But Jacob said, I will not let you go until you bless me. And he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men, and have prevailed. And Jacob asked him, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has not been delivered. My life has been delivered, sorry. Can't speak. The sun rose upon him as he passed Penuel, limping because of his hip. Therefore to this day the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hips on the sinew of the thigh. So yeah, he literally created, okay, he literally was like, given that, okay? And so, he literally created. And if you go on to read the book of Exodus, you'll find out, oh yeah, he did. He brought the people up and gave them the land of Canaan. So yeah, he created Jacob. The land of Jacob, the peoples of Jacob. What we call modern day Israel, also known as the Jews. The Shemites, also known as Semites. It's what it means to be anti-Semitic when you're anti-Jew. Okay? I mean, this guy has to be some kind of an idiot not to understand that.
Of Israel, which came about over time and through natural processes.
No, it didn't. No, it didn't. It came because the Lord blessed Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and said, your descendants will be as numerous as the sand of the sea. And were they? Yeah, I'd say they are. Can you count them all? Everybody from Abraham all the way down to modern day Israel and all the Jews in the world today? Can you count them all? Go on, I dare you. We know 6 million of them perished during the Holocaust. So, yeah, I'd say they didn't come about by natural processes. You absolute moron!
In Ezekiel 21, it refers to making a sign. It is even used...
Are you flippin' serious right now? Are you flippin' serious right now? Let me back this up just a tiny bit here. Alright, I think we'll end it here. Because I'm done with this guy. This guy's an idiot. Because again, let's go to prophetic books. Yay! Idiot. The word of the Lord came to me, Ezekiel, again. As for you, son of man, mark 2 ways for the sword of the king of Babylon to come. Both of them shall come from the same land. And make a signpost, make it at the head of the way to a city. mark a way for the sword to come to Rabbah of the Ammonites, and to Judah, and to Jerusalem the fortified. For the king of Babylon stands at the parting of the way, and at the head of the two ways, to use divination. He shakes the arrows, he consults the teraphim, and he looks at the liver. Into his right hand comes the divination for Jerusalem, to set battering rams, to open the mouth with murder, to lift the voice with shouting, and to set battering rams against the gates, to cast up mounds, to build siege towers. But to them it will seem like a false divination. They have sworn solemn oaths, but he brings their guilt to remembrance, that they may be taken. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, because you have made your guilt to be remembered, in that your transgressions are uncovered, so that in all your deeds your sin appears, because you have come to remembrance, you shall be taken in hand. And you, O profane wicked one, Prince of Israel, whose day has come, the time of your final punishment, thus says the Lord God, remove the turban and take off the crown. Things shall not remain as they are. Exalt that which is low, and bring low that which is exalted. A ruin, 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 I will make it. This also shall not be until he comes, the one whom judgment belongs, and I will give it to him. Oh, make a sign? Create a sign? Yeah. Ooh, gee, I wonder. Oh, create a sign. Doesn't that imply intelligence? Like you'd have to actually make a sign that says go this way or go this way? Dude, seriously. You're so dumb. And yeah, I already mentioned...
In 21, it refers to making a sign. It is even used to refer...
Yeah, and I already mentioned this one. Okay? Before, yes, there is one that says eat. Okay? And that's David and Bathsheba. Right after the Bathsheba conceives, right? And the Lord says, you must repent of your sin. And he says, yes, I will. And the Lord says, but I'm going to kill the child. And David fasted and wept and prayed, threw himself before the Lord to try to save the child's life. But the Lord killed the child anyway. And that's what they're talking about there. That bara is to eat. And yes, we already talked about that. Yes, there is a few instances where the word bara is used as eat. Just like there is bara as fatten or fatten. Okay? And like I said, space, space. What space am I talking about? Does your mind instantly go to stars and planets and nebula and galaxies? Or does it go to an empty room? Does it go to the space outside? Wide open spaces. If I said wide open spaces, you probably think of grasslands. Or maybe like on a mountain where there's no trees. Come on, man. Think about it. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, drop a comment below. Let me know what you think of this video series so far. And as we say, we'll see you on the next one.